Thank you all for being here at our first Tuesday book club. Um, Tonight we are covering the book Nuns here by Dr. Ryan Burge, who is with us. So we're very grateful for his time this evening. I'll start with a little prayer, give a quick introduction, and then hand it over to him. He's prepared some slides, maybe about 20 minutes, and then after that we'll have plenty of time for discussion. Right, so let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us together this warm summer evening. We thank you also for Dr. Burge and his work to help us understand our fellow children of God. So for those of you who maybe aren't familiar or don't know, Dr. Ryan Burge, he's an assistant professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University and a pastor in the American Baptist Church. He focuses on the interaction of religiosity and political behavior, particularly in America. And in addition to the Nuns, he's published a second book this year titled 20 Myths About Religion and Politics in America.
There it is. Go buy a copy, please. Many copies.
Yes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Burge.
Well, hello, everybody. Let me share my screen really quickly here. Okay, I'm going to give you, I know you've already seen a lot of these graphs, but I actually have some new graphs in the presentation that you'll probably see some new stuff too. And they're also in color, which is, is nice from time to time. So here we go. As the book talks about, this all started with a tweet. And this is the tweet over here on the left. I tweeted it out when I was basically an unknown person at that point. I only had 500 Twitter followers or something like that. Tweeted it out, went viral. And all of a sudden I became a person that reporters wanted to talk to, which I never had before in my life. And that finding, was on the front page of CNN. It made the New York Post. It made the Washington Post, made the New York Times. The graph I made here was recreated in both the Post and the Times, which doesn't happen very often. And it went on the front page of Reddit, which is, if you're a younger person, Reddit is a very important website. And it got like 70,000 upvotes, made the front page. And I had people that I hadn't spoken to in 20 years or emailing me, go, I saw you. I went to high school with people. I saw you on the front page of Reddit, or I saw you on CNN. And so when I was approached to write a book, I thought that people are interested in the Nuns. I saw it in what I was doing. So why don't I write a book about what people are interested in? And that's where really the book came from. So here's this graph in a bigger form. Looks like this. I'm going to knock through just a couple of these groups kind of individually, just to point out a couple things. This is how we divide American religion in 7 traditions: evangelical, mainline, Black Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, other faith, and then no religion. Okay. So this is our no religion. This is really why we're here. The share of Americans who were nuns in the early 1970s was about 1 in 20 Americans. I was just reading an interesting paper from 1968 from the sociologist who called the nuns the neglected category in 1968 because they were a rounding error. Really, you couldn't do much with them statistically because there just weren't enough of them in America to do much. You couldn't even cut them by gender or race or age or anything because there just weren't that many in a sample. But 5% in 1972. The 2018 data puts it closer to 23%. And now I have more recent data that says the nuns are probably between 28 and 30% of America today, depending on how you ask the question and what response options you offer. So when people ask me how many nuns there are in America today, I say about 30% of adult Americans are nuns, which is a lot of people. Now it's not a rounding error. It's actually the largest religious tradition, non-religious tradition in America are the nuns. A couple things real quick. These are evangelicals. Actually, I talk about this a lot in 20 myths. There's a myth that evangelicals are in decline. There are actually more evangelicals by percentage and by raw number in America today than there were in 1972. And actually, there's the same number of evangelicals in America today there were in 1993 when they were 30% of America. There's about 70 million evangelicals in America today. So they're doing just fine. And actually, the share of Americans who self-identify evangelical is now a third. It's been a third for the last 13 years. So evangelicalism is doing just fine. Now, these are Catholics. the Catholic story is kind of a boring story because it's from 27% to about 23%. So a very slow decline over a long period of time. I will say the one thing that the Catholics kind of overlook when they look at this graph is the share of Catholics who went to Mass every Sunday was 55% in the 1970s, and now it's 25%. So the share of people who say they're Catholic has not really changed, but the share of like devout Mass going Catholics has dropped dramatically over the last 40 years. So a lot more cultural Catholicism is what we call that. And then this is the one that you guys are probably all interested in, mainline Protestant Christianity, which is what I'm a member of, the American Baptist Church, which is a mainline tradition. And I assume that you all are part of a mainline tradition. PCUSA is a mainline branch, one of the seven sisters. In 1975, about 30% of Americans were mainline Protestants. It was the largest religious tradition in America. I've actually seen data going back to the 50s that say almost half of all adult Americans were mainline Protestants in the 1950s. And we've gone from 30% to 10% today. 1 in 10 Americans is a mainline Protestant. And I think there's a very good reason to believe it's going to be 5% in the next decade or 15 years, because the average mainline Protestant now is over 60 years old. Only 15% of Episcopalians have kids at home. So, we're seeing a precipitous decline in mainline Protestant Christianity. I'm going to write more about that in the future, about what that means for the future of America, the death of mainline Protestant Christianity. So, question, why is this happening, right? And as all good social scientists will tell you, everything in life is complicated. Okay. It's never simple. It's never easy. It's never like one of those things you see online, the 3 simple tricks to make you a better person. It's never 3 simple tricks. Okay. It's always many things working in concert from all kinds of, sectors and fragments of American life. So let's hit a couple of these real quick. First, secularization. If you take any sociology of religion course, you're going to spend a week on secularization. Okay. And succinctly said, that's the idea that as society becomes more educated and economically prosperous, it becomes less religious. And that goes back to this German sociologist named Max Weber, who's probably the most important sociologist to ever live. He argued as countries kind of advance, they don't need God anymore. And, he gives this example, like think about like what life was 2,000 years ago, where the most important question you had was, is it going to rain enough? And if it didn't rain enough, why did it not rain enough? They didn't understand meteorology or climatology or anything like that. They thought if it didn't rain, God was mad at them, right? So what you try to do is make God happy with you. And when you try to, why did my child cough twice and die as an 8-year-old? Because God's mad at you, not because of viruses or bacteria. When you can't explain the world, God becomes the thing that explains the unexplainable. But as you get more science, you need less God. He actually called this process, I'm not going to say the German word. I love the translation, disenchantment, but I also love this translation more, demagication. That essentially what happens, education becomes, in an educated world, you need less magic and you need more science, right? So for what Weber is saying is that really science drives out the idea of magic. And then you got our friend Karl Marx. Apparently you can't talk about him in school anymore, but I'll tell you about Karl Marx real quick. Karl Marx believed that it was all about class struggle. It was rich people trying to keep poor people down. And one of the ways that rich people try to keep poor people down is by telling them God wanted them to work hard. And God wants you to, give me your best labor in the factory. And what Marx would say to that is religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. What Marx said is when people get educated, they realize that people are using religion as a weapon to keep them down, not build them up, and to make them happy in their poverty and happy in their hard work for the rich landowner who's making all the money. That's why also they didn't want slaves in the American South to learn how to read and write, because then they would realize how bad their situation was in life. So secularization is this idea that once you get more educated, you don't need God anymore. If you look at Europe, you see clearly. I mean, a lot of places in Europe are post-religious. Germany's 8% of people go to church every week. France is 6%, Sweden 6%, Finland's 5%. Even it's Italy, the home of Catholicism. 3/4 of Italians don't go to church every week. So a lot of Western Europe is basically in a secularization. They've moved ahead of us in terms of secularization. They've been far ahead of us for a long time. And if you look at this graph, this is GDP per capita, which is a kind of crude measure of economic prosperity on the X. And this is the percent of that country saying religion is very important on the Y. As you can tell, it's basically a negative relationship till you get out here in the outliers over here. Even Ireland's an outlier for a whole bunch of weird economic reasons. But look here, this is the United States. We should be, if we were on the trend line, we should be down here about 10%. Instead, we're about 52%. So if America was following the trend of other countries, no one in America would say religion is very important. So we are an odd country in a lot of ways. We're American exceptionalism. We are the exception. If you look down here, like China is down here, makes sense, right? Communist Bulgaria, Belarus, Albania, countries that were post-Soviet countries, they're all very irreligious because communism basically drove out God, a belief in God. So another thing that a lot of people don't think about is social desirability bias. And so social desirability bias is the idea that people lie to you. It's the fancy way that we say we are lied to on surveys. This is something that a lot of people who don't take a methodology course don't know much about. But imagine you're walking through a mall someday and someone pulls you aside and goes, I'll give you $10 if you answer 5 survey questions for me. And you say, oh, sure, $10 is great. Take you in a room, have you sit down, you stare at a survey administrator in the face, and they ask you a question. Do you masturbate? Or are Black people lazy? Or what about, you ever cheated on your spouse? You ever done that before? Do you do drugs? How many drugs? What kind of drugs? You do weed? You do pot? You do coke? What do you do? Or should a woman be president? Those are all questions that we know that people lie about constantly, because there's a socially desirable answer and there's the real answer. The social desirable answer, I've never done drugs. I've never cheated on my wife. I think women are great. I think Black people are great. Reality is a lot of people don't believe that, but they'll lie to you on surveys because they want to give you the socially desirable answer. Okay. Another area where this is often true is religion questions. How often do you go to church? Seems like a basic question, but people lie about it all the time. And we know they lie about it. Okay. How do we know? Well, a team of researchers in the early 1990s went to Ashtabula County, Ohio, and they did a survey of residents in Ashtabula County, Ohio. And they asked people in the county, did you go to church last Sunday? And of that, 36% of people on the survey said they went to church last Sunday. And then they said, okay, let's just check. So they looked up every single church in Ashtabula County in the phone book. This is the 90s. They still had phone books. And they called the pastor or priest and said, how many people do you have in church last Sunday? And the churches that didn't respond, they drove the parking lots and counted cars and made a multiplication, like 1.5 persons per car. And they added it all up. What they find out? Well, they found that only 20% of people in Ashtabula County, Ohio, actually go to church every Sunday. So essentially half the number of people say they go to church, lie about it. And what that does is it means that they've been lying about this stuff for a long, long time. So when we ask people for a long time, are you a nun on a religious survey? They're going to say no, even though they are, because the socially desirable answer is to say you're a Christian or Catholic or something like that. So maybe actually what we're doing now in social science is getting closer to the real answer, because the stigma against being a nun has reduced over the last 10 or 20 years. So maybe we're actually revealing what's always been there by using better methods, and the old numbers we have just don't add up because people lied about it all the time. It's a really difficult problem. Obviously, we've got to talk about politics and religion. I'm sure some of you in the audience have read one of these books, or, Randall Ballmer's new book talks about how really the religious right was not founded based on culture war issues like abortion, gay marriage, and pornography. It was based on racism. It tells an interesting story of Holmes County, Mississippi, where after Brown versus Board, the schools had to integrate. And 3 years later, not a single white kid went to the public school in Holmes County, Mississippi. They all went to the Christian private school. And then they were sued by the IRS, and their tax exempt status was revoked. And Randall Ballmer says, that's actually the real origin of the religious right. It's not abortion, gay marriage, it's racism, which is a theory that's kind of been, a lot of doubt has been heaped on that theory over the last couple of years. Maybe as part of the story, but definitely not a central part of the story. This really interesting book by Kevin Cruz called One Nation Under God, how corporate America created Christian America, argues that basically a lot of rich capitalist folks paid pastors to be capitalists back in the day, especially during the 40s and 50s. A really interesting argument. I recommend it highly. And then there's this argument about Christian nationalism, the idea that America is a Christian country founded on Christian principles. If you don't think Christian nationalism matters, watch the footage of January 6th and see how many crosses you see and Christian flags you see. There's a lot of people there who thought they were doing God's will by storming the Capitol on January 6th, by bringing the country back. That's Taking America Back for God is the title of that book by Perry and Whitehead. I recommend that book as well. So you can see it in the data, clear as can be. Liberals, over 40% of liberals say they're nuns. Only about 10% of conservatives say they're nuns. We're seeing continually the American public is coming to this understanding to be a Christian is to be a conservative theologically and politically, and to be a liberal is to be a nun. So we're seeing this kind of religious divide and political divide run hand in hand. I think there's not nearly enough written about the religious polarization going on in America. The fact the Mainline was 30%, now is 10%, while evangelicals haven't gone away, is a pretty good evidence of the fact that we are seeing religious polarization in this country. We need to talk about it a lot more. So clearly politics is doing a lot of the driving here. 40% of liberals say they're nuns today. Other theories, the internet. I mean, I can't prove this, but it feels right. I really wish I could prove it, but it just feels right. Like the internet kind of drove all these ideas even farther. I talk in the book about a book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, The Collapse and Revival of Social Capital. He argues that people just don't join anything anymore, whether it be bowling leagues, the Moose, or church. We just don't do social stuff. What's funny is he blames it on cable TV because he was writing in the 90s. Today would be Facebooking alone, tweeting alone, TikToking alone, right? We have many more avenues to not do stuff, to stay at home and be antisocial than ever before. A lack of trust in institutions, Catholic Church scandal, obviously top of mind on that. And then also the breakdown of the family, right? The nuclear family is not the nuclear family anymore. We have a child free. We have many, many people who are voluntarily child free now. We never had before. And divorce rates obviously are high. We don't know how high they are. It's actually really hard to calculate divorce rate, but obviously lots of people never get married or get divorced. And so the nuclear family breaking down. So let's talk about demographics really quick. This is a graph that's worth dwelling on just a little bit. This is the one that gets the oohs and ahs whenever I give this presentation. So silent generation, people born 1925, 1945. This is not in the book, by the way. It's in this new edition that's coming out next year. Silent generation, 49% Protestants, 22% Catholic. So 71% Protestant or Catholic. Okay. Nuns, 6% atheist agnostic, 12% nothing in particular. Okay. 18% nuns, 71% Protestant or Catholic. Okay. Now look at Gen Z down here. These are people born in 96 or later. So these are the youngest adult Americans we have today. Only 22% of them are Protestants. So 49 to 22. And then Catholics drop from 22 to 15. So 37% Protestant or Catholic. And then the nuns are 13% atheist agnostic and 32% nothing in particular. So 45% of Generation Z are nuns and 37% are Catholic. They're the first generation in American history where the nuns clearly outnumber the Catholics and Catholics and Protestants. Every day in America, lots of silent generation people die. And every day in a lot of America, a lot of Gen Z becomes adults. And that's how we're becoming less religious over time. You replace 71 with 37, and this is how we become less religious every single day. These people are dying, and these people are taking their place. It's just a theory of generational replacement, basically. Let's skip that. Okay. All nuns are not created equal. I hope if there's something you get out of the book, this is something you definitely get out of the book, that all nuns are not created equal. Atheists, agnostics, nothing in particular, are different people and are not the same. We should not look at them all the same. If you put 5 nuns in a room today, one's an atheist, one's an agnostic, and 3 are nothing in particular. Okay, that's a really important point. Most nuns are not atheist or agnostic. They're this group called nothing in particular. About 21% of Americans today are nothing in particular. They're the fastest growing religious group in America today. It's nothing in particular. Okay, keep that in mind. Here's something that's really interesting about nothing in particulars. They are the least educated group in America today. Only 21% of nothing in particulars have a 4-year college degree. Okay. Atheists, it's 46%. Agnostics, it's 43%. Okay. So they have half as much education as atheist agnostics do, which means they have lower incomes than atheists or agnostics do. Look at this. Almost 3 in 5, nothing in particulars, make less than $50,000 a year as a household, which means that most nothing in particulars live in poverty. Okay. Only 13% of them make 6 figures, which is half the rate of atheists. So they have very low education and they also have very low income. And politically, they're actually a lot more moderate, right? They're here in the middle of the spectrum, not on the edge. Atheists are over here on the liberal democratic side. They're right smack in the middle of the spectrum. Okay. They're not, nothing particulars are not politically liberal, but they're also not politically engaged either. So this is a bunch of activities. We ask you, have you done any of these things in the last 12 months? I mean, if you go down and start looking at it, look, only 9% of Nothing in Particular has attended a political meeting. That's half the rate of atheists. Only 8% went to a protest or march. That's the third the rate of atheists. Only 19% contacted a public official. That's half the rate of atheists. You're seeing a pattern here, right? Only 13% put up a political yard sign. 25% of atheists put up a political yard sign. They are not politically engaged. You're seeing a picture emerging now. Low education, low income, and very politically disengaged. I think from a social science perspective, they're the scariest group in America today because they have nothing. They're falling behind. They're not engaging in American society. And I think that's a recipe for disaster from a sociological perspective. The other thing is Nothing in Particular is actually go to church a little bit. You can see it right here. They go a little bit. Atheist agnostics don't go at all. And when you ask them how important is religion, 35% of Nothing in Particulars say religion's at least somewhat important. So they're not anti-religion like atheist agnostics are, who are anti-religion. They're a whole different class of religious people. And this is really like the point for Christians who are trying to win back the nuns. Where do you focus on? So this is a panel survey. We asked people in 2010, what are you religiously? We asked them again in 2014, what are you religiously? Amongst atheists, 81% of them are still atheists, and 13% of them are Nothing in Particular, and 2.4% of them are agnostic. Okay. And look, the percentage that became Christians, 1%. Amongst agnostics, 3.6% of them became Christians 4 years later. But look up here at our Nothing in Particulars. 16% of them became Nothing in Particular, or became Christians 4 years later. 1%, 4%, 16%. And think about this. This is 16% of 20% of the population. You're talking about a lot of people in this little box right here. It went from being a none to being a some. We don't see atheists doing that. We don't see agnostics doing that. We see Nothing in Particulars doing that. That's a really key insight from the book. Is Nothing in Particulars are the ones who are willing to change their identity over time. This is the way I think about religion. Far left, you got atheist. Next to them, you got agnostic. And then next to them, you got Nothing in Particular. And then you got your religion on this side. What we see is hardly ever do people go from religion to atheism or atheism to religion. They almost always go between Nothing in Particular. It's like a sort of like a transfer station between something and nothing. Okay. So that really is where the battle is being fought in American religion, is in that Nothing in Particular square right there. And that 20% of America, there's a lot of people going in and out one way to the other way. And I think if you're really going to focus on a group, that's the group I would focus on, is that Nothing in Particular group. So some quick takeaways and we'll do questions and answers. Couple things. In the book, I talk about how globalization is an inevitable force in American life. It just is going to happen no matter how many politicians tell you they can bring jobs back to America. They're not coming back to America. Secularization is a lot of the same thing. I used to lay in bed at night and think, why am I such a bad pastor? Why is my church declining? Why can't I get more people in? And then at some point you realize it's really, really hard to have a growing church in a dying community. And we had a lot of people move away. So that was really something that I thought about a lot. It's really, really hard. We have a lot of headwinds in American Christianity right now and very few tailwinds. And secularization is the biggest headwind in the world. Not easy to beat that. If there's 60 million nuns in America, this is a spreadsheet. Every line in the spreadsheet represents a person. We need to continue to remember that people are people and they matter, and everybody's story is different. So while I give you some like broad strokes about the nuns, everyone's going to have their own sort of individualized story about how they became a nun. I tell pastors in the book, stop being so partisan, though. For God's sakes, what are you doing? Something I continue to talk about a lot is people think pastors are partisan from the pulpit. I wrote a Wall Street Journal op-ed a couple of months ago where I so clearly that's not true. The vast majority of pastors are not political from the pulpit because it makes no sense to be political from the pulpit, because you're going to drive off more people than you're going to drive in. But I do say that doesn't mean they should walk away from political matters. There's a theological concept called Imago Dei, which argues that every human being is born in the image and likeness of God. Whether you're black, white, Hispanic, Asian, disabled, abled, born, unborn, God cares about all of us. And I think that's Imago Dei makes everyone uncomfortable because it makes every political party look like they're wrong on something, and they are. So I think pastors need to start teaching a theological worldview, which does not make one party look good and one party look bad, but make everyone look bad in light of what the kingdom's all about. So that's Imago Dei. And I'll end with one story and then that'll be it. My church is a little church, so we have 15 people on an average Sunday. My community is a very poor community. 85% of kids in our public school are on free or reduced lunch. So about 10 years ago, we decided to pack up brown bags of food, about 200 of them every Friday, take them to the school and let the social workers distribute them to the kids who will go hungry over the weekend. And we've been doing that program for a long, long time. We put a little flyer in the bag that says, we're First Baptist Church. We don't know you. We love you. How can we help you? If you need any help, here's our number. One Friday, this grandma calls and says, it's October. It's getting cold. My grandson needs a coat. We can't afford one. Can you help? We just so happened to be having a rummage sale in our fellowship hall that weekend. And we said, come on down before anybody else gets here and picks it over. You can have whatever you want. And that grandma came and filled up 3 big old bags full of clothes. I never got her name. I never got the boy's name. But what I know is that boy will at least go on through his life and go, that church did not know me, but cared about me and tried to help. And that's all that we can do in this world is throw seed as much as we can, like the parable of the sower. I think the ground is getting rockier and less hospitable every day, but that does not, take us off the hook from throwing seed. Our job is to continue to put our shoulder to the wheel and continue to push and serve and build the kingdom as best we can and love people like Jesus would, and let the seed fall wherever it's going to fall. So I will stop right there and open the floor up. I went too long. I apologize, Lisa.
No, thank you. That was so awesome. Any questions or comments? By the way, you're probably all muted. So if you do have a question, remember to unmute yourself.
I was going to just ask, what are some ideas to attract some of these nothing in particulars? I like in your book, you sort of said, hey, it's kind of a fruitful field here if you could possibly figure out a way.
Yeah, I get that question a lot.
Yeah, well, it's the obvious question. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I think. I think the nothing in particulars need an opportunity to be social and a space to be social. I think that's what most American young people especially are crying out for, is a place to be social in real life, especially coming out of COVID. People want an opportunity to hang out, enjoy space with each other. And so what I've been advising churches to do is do a social thing at least once a quarter, whether it be a carnival or a barbecue or a Thanksgiving meal or bounce houses for the kids or whatever it is, but no preaching, no praise and worship music, no contact cards, just a space to enjoy each other and enjoy company, right? No pressure, no frills, no ulterior motive, and literally no ulterior motive, right? Don't be like, well, we really are trying to do this. No. Just enjoy time with people and give them the opportunity to enjoy time with each other and realize that church people are just like them, right? They're not better. They're not worse. They're not different. They're actually going through the same things they're going through. I think nothing in particulars need a space to do that. And what churches have? Big lawns, kitchens, gymnasiums, places to meet. Why not use that for social things? I'm a big believer that people come to church for the wrong reasons, but they stay for the right reasons. So give them a lot of wrong reasons to come, right? Give them free food, give them giveaway. I think all that stuff is great. And then again, you're throwing seed and let it land wherever it's going to land. But your job is to continue to throw, and the yield is someone else's problem, not yours. That's where I'm coming down on all of this right now.
I have a question.
Sure.
So what do you see as the role of ritual with this generation?
What a great question. I'll give you an example. I do weddings for some couples sometimes who kind of aren't religious, but want a religious wedding, maybe to make their parents happy or their grandparents happy. And I was asking a couple, like, what do you want scripture? And they go, yes. I'm like, you guys don't believe in the scripture though. They go, I want it to feel spiritual. I want it to feel like church. And I said, okay, there's still a deep desire in the human heart for ritual. And actually, I think the problem is that the kind of Christianity that's winning in America today is evangelical Christianity, which is very low church and very non-ritualistic. And I think the kind of religion that I see a lot of my peers and younger being drawn to are ritualistic traditions like mainline Protestant Christianity with things like the creed and the prayers and the doxology and the Gloria. We do all that every Sunday in my church. We have a lot of ritual built into that. I think when people go to church, a lot of them want it to feel like church, not a rock concert. Okay. I think a lot of the churches that kind of lead the PR battle and win the PR battle are the ones with the fog machines and the concerts and all that stuff. I think a lot of people want to go to church and they want it to feel sacred and holy and set apart in something different, transcendent, to use a word, right? And I think that's where mainline Protestant Christianity really needs to say, we still do things the way they've been done for 100 years. And I have a lot of people ask what kind of vows they want to use at their wedding. And they'll say, I want to use the same vows my parents and their grandparents said, which are their traditional vows, for rich or for poor, in sickness and health. They want those vows because they meant something to their parents and grandparents, and they mean something to them today. So I do think there's still a very strong role for ritual. We just got to convince young people that they need that ritual, that it actually in some ways saves them. And I'm a big evangelist for the salvific properties of ritual. And I was actually talking to my congregation last week about how sometimes we take communion once a month because we're Baptists and that's what we do. I see sometimes I take it and it means nothing. And sometimes I take it and it means everything. But my job is to show up, serve it, give it, and see what happens. Young people need to hear that, right? It's not going to always be fun going to church. It's not going to always be a spiritual experience going to church. But there's some value in just showing up and giving God an opportunity to work. And I think
Can I
they don't
ask
hear.
one follow-up to that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Are you seeing any new rituals that are showing up with some of the Gen Z and nuns in general? I mean, I'm curious about that because I've had some particularly young adults asking for different ways of kind of marking situations, particularly all the violence that we've experienced. So I'm just curious about any different newer rituals or something that's shown up.
I'll point you toward a book by Tara Isabella Burton called Strange Rites, which is like it's called New Religions for a Godless Era or something like that. That's like the subtitle of it. And she actually makes this really interesting point that the rituals that young people do now are like things like Orange Theory, which is like a bicycling class, like an exercise class you do communally. That they're finding ritual and doing other things like exercising and things like that. I will say, and I'm not a big believer in politics has become religion for some people, but I think it has for a small subset of Americans. And like going to a protest for some people can be a spiritual experience, right? Because it has that ecstatic idea to it, has a collective idea to it. You kind of hear speakers sometimes, you get animated and agitated and emotional. So there's a lot of parallels between going to a political protest and going to church, I think. But I also always point people to the idea that politics will never save you. Okay. Politics will never save you. It will do the opposite. Okay. It's all about power and money and greed. That's what politics is about. It will not save you from what you need saved from. And I always point people, I go, if you're going to be righteously angry, that's great. But understand, no matter how many signs you hold up, how many rallies you go to, that is not going to save you in the long run. So I'm always pointing people back to the idea that you need some ritual in your life, and the rituals you're trying to use. Oh, there's a great book that just came out by a psychiatrist saying like what psychiatry is trying to do today is actually bring back rituals that religion used to have, but people aren't religious anymore. So they got rid of them. And they're trying to bring those back. Things like meditation. You know what meditation is? Daily prayer. That's what it is, right? You know what quiet time is? Meditation, daily prayer. It's all the same stuff, right? Affirmations, all that stuff is religious at its core. So it's so interesting to me that people are like, we don't need religion. And then in psychology, like, oh, wait, we actually kind of do. Like we need those rituals to save us. And so I think there's a lot of value in saying you need these things. You need to come back to these things.
Carol Allen, I see your hand is up. You are still muted. I don't think I can unmute you myself.
I think she unmuted and then muted.
By the way, the name of that book is How God Works, the Science Behind the Benefits of Religion.
Okay, Carol, go ahead.
I
it sounds like you're saying that the nuns, as varied as they are resisting being used as commodities, and that ritual is part of human nature, human spirit, and it has to do with building community and being recognized. And what I'm wondering, because I, as I just was muted, I'm still learning all the new technology, but we live in a digital age, and the younger ones really are weird on that. How does that affect your ideas, do you think?
Yeah.
Or the nuns,
Mhm.
people becoming nuns?
I think that young people have been taught a lie, which is that digital community replaces real community. I think that's a lie. And I think actually there's tons of evidence that backs that up, by the way. And we're seeing more and more of it every day. We're seeing even the social media companies themselves have been doing internal research, which they won't release to us, but have been leaked out. For instance, they found that young girls 13 to 16 who use Instagram actually had lower self-confidence than those who didn't. Because it makes you feel worse because you're not beautiful, you're not rich, you're not, going to tropical locations and things like that. I think we need to continue to teach young people that the digital world is a great world. And I have a book. I have 2 books because I did well on Twitter. Okay, I'm going to be completely honest with you. But that is just a part of your life. That does not replace seeing people face to face across the table. Okay, that's where real life happens. And community is real people. And I continue to tell people, the thing about it, there's always this joke that goes around. People are like, I had plans and they got canceled and I was so happy. No, don't be happy your plans got canceled. Go to dinner with your friends. Go to a movie with your family. Get out of the house and go do something. Is it harder? Yes. Is it awkward? Yes. Can it be expensive? Yes. But your mental health is worth more than all of that. And almost always, whenever we go do a social thing, we come back, we get back to our house, and you know what we think to ourselves? I'm glad I did that. I think we need to continue to tell people there's such a tremendous value in being in community. And what I worry about, especially with the nothing in particulars, is the data is painting a picture of a group of people who are completely isolated in American community. They're not engaged politically. They're not engaged educationally. They're not engaged economically. And I think they're falling further and further behind. I actually think they're the casualties of globalization. Those people went to high school and went no farther, thought they can get a good job and move ahead in America, which you could 40 years ago, but you can't today because now your job belongs to a Mexican or a Chinese person because they can do it more cheaply than you can do it. And they're falling behind. And I don't want to draw a straight line, but I'm thinking about a lot. If you think about the kind of people who have been shooting up places like in Highland Park over the weekend, they're young men. And I bet you dollars to donuts, many of them are not in part of a community, religious or otherwise. They feel like everyone's against them. They feel socially isolated. They feel like they have no hope for the future. And I think that's a recipe for disaster. At least atheist agnostics have a rallying cry, which is liberal politics, education, economic advancement. Nothing in particulars have none of those things. And I think that makes them a really, really scary group of folks. And that's who I really, really worry about, both as a social scientist, but also as a pastor at the same time.
Thanks.
Sylvia?
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and bringing science to help us understand what's happening in our faith traditions. As a church that's working to become more inclusive, are there racial breakdowns that you can give us in the nuns?
Yeah. Hold on. Let me pull up a slide really quickly here. Yes. So interestingly enough, what I'm really seeing in the data a lot now is, let me share my screen really quick. There, share. Okay. So this is the share that were nuns in 2008 on the left, and then the share that were nuns in 2018 on the right. Obviously Asians are in a different kind of lane entirely. And I think, we could go into a whole discussion about why that is. I think primarily that's because they come from Eastern religious traditions like Buddhism, which kind of have a different conception of religion than the West does. But now we see that, for instance, 20% of white people were nuns in 2008. Now it's over a third of white people are nuns. But what's really, really interesting is the Black number. Okay. Used to be the Blacks were almost the least likely, tied for the least likely to be nuns, only 17.7% in 2008. And now it's 32% of Black people are nuns. So we're seeing them actually grab onto the nuns label faster than other racial groups. But I'll give you a little tidbit about that, which I think is really, really interesting. So if 32% of them are nuns, of the nuns, only 10% of them identify as atheist or agnostic, and 90% of them identify as nothing in particular. Okay. For white people, 40% of them identify as atheist or agnostic, and 60% of them identify as nothing in particular. So when Black people leave religion, they do not want to call themselves atheist or agnostic because it has a lot of this sort of negative baggage attached to it in the Black community. Something to keep in mind is when they leave religion, they don't go all the way to the other side. They go to the middle, which is the nothing in particular category. So I think in a lot of ways, they're winnable. But I also think if you look at the data, you're seeing this divide happen where young Black devout people are actually becoming more conservative over time, politically conservative over time. Because I think in a lot of ways, they think the Democratic Party has used them. And they like some of the Republican values on things like abortion and same-sex marriage. We don't talk about this enough, by the way, but liberals give Black Protestants a pass on gay marriage all the time. Black people have the same views as LGBT stuff as evangelicals do. But because they voted for Biden, we kind of ignore that. They have some pretty conservative social views. It's just they vote Democrat. In 20 Minutes, I talk about that. Don't call Black Protestants liberals. They are moderate Democrats. That's what they are, moderate. 40% of them identify as moderate. They are not liberals, okay? So I think that's something to keep in mind in the Black communities. When they leave, they don't go far. But also Black religion is actually very conservative, more conservative than, let's say, a lot of white mainline traditions are, especially. And I think they're actually to the right of the average Catholic too. So there's this kind of interesting thing going on in the Black tradition, especially, that I don't think we fully have grasped yet, or what it means for the future of the nuns and the Black Protestant church.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the book. I bought it, number one, I read it, and I'm looking forward to updates from time to time because it was very insightful. I particularly like how you separated the nuns into multiple categories, because I fell into the trap, I guess, if you will, of saying, okay, the nuns are all non-believers. And I think you did a good job of that. And also the fact that you show that, which was counterintuitive to me, that the nuns were also economically disadvantaged, because that worries me a lot, especially in the last 2 weeks. I'm reading your book and I'm seeing the growth of the nuns, and yet I'm living my life and I'm seeing the growth of Christian nationalism. And in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christian nationalism is at an all-time high, at least within my lifetime. I've never seen Christian, and I was raised a right-wing Catholic in a right-wing neighborhood, and I've never seen Christian nationalism as ugly and as sharp and as dangerous as it is today.
So I'll say first that I can't say that empirically because we haven't been measuring Christian nationalism for very long. It's actually a really new concept, by the way. Like, we've only sort of conceptualized it like in the last 5 years, like in a methodological way. I will say this: Christian nationalists have gotten louder than ever before. I think that's completely true. So just to kind of go off on a tangent, just for a 2-minute tangent, I'm working on a book proposal called The Death of Polite Religion and the Future of America. And the argument there is that all we have left in America today, I'll give you a statistic. Okay. In 1988, 55% of Americans said they were not born again, but were not nuns. Okay. That I consider that the middle of American religion, right? So not evangelical, not nun. 55% in 1988 said they were not born again, not nuns. In 2018, it was 35% of people said they were not born again and not nuns. So now only a third of Americans are in the middle of American religion. We're seeing evangelicals, like I just talked about, doing just fine. Actually, I think growing in some ways. Actually, they're taking an outside role in the American political discourse, in my estimation. And then we see the nuns rising, which we've just been talking about, right? So now what we're going to have in the future is we're going to have half of America who are conservative Catholics, evangelicals, Protestants, Jews, Latter-day Saints, and Muslims on one side. And then a growing number of nuns, probably close to half of America, who are nuns on the other side, and no one in the middle. No more polite religion, which says, I can see both sides, right? I'm willing to, be tolerant and understanding and inclusive. All we're going to have is a lot of this and a lot of that. And American society is going to be worse for it. American culture is going to be worse for it. American religion is going to be worse for it. I think we're better when we have churches that are more politically diverse, where we have Republicans and Democrats sitting side by side on the pews on Sunday morning. We had that in the late 80s, by the way. We don't have that today. I think that's bad for our country. It's bad for our future. It's bad for tolerance. So I think what you're talking about, Tom, is the idea that these Christian nationalists have gotten louder and have actually pulled evangelicals to the right. The average evangelical, the share of evangelicals, white evangelicals say they're very conservative, doubled in the last 10 years, from 20% to 40%. They said they're very conservative, 20% to 40% in 9 years. So we're seeing that there's not many more moderate conservatives in evangelicalism now. It's only very conservatives because they're pulling people to one side or the other side. And by the way, the share of atheists who said they're very liberal also doubled in the last 10 years. So we're seeing is we're pulling both sides apart from each other, and fewer people feel like they fit. So they're leaving, right? So if I'm a moderate or I'm a liberal and I want to be a Christian, good luck. There are not many churches that will welcome me anymore. So what am I going to do? I want to become a nun. Okay. So what we're seeing is a lot of it's just driving political polarization, religious polarization are driving each other. And we're going to see America where we get along less, we talk less, we have fewer friends, we have a less diverse network. And I think we're worse for it as a country. And it makes you wonder if democracy can survive in such a hopelessly divided country. Not to leave you, give you guys a bad taste in your mouth, but I really think that's what we're facing. One more thing real quick, and Tom alluded to this, updates. Well, you're going to get a big update in March of 23 because the second edition of the Nuns, this is the cover. I just got it today. I'm working on it right now. So the second editions of the Nuns is going to come out in March of 2023. Revised and expanded, probably going to be about 75 more pages of content, about 30 more graphs. Going to do a chapter on COVID and what the pandemic did to American religion. So just a lot. When I wrote the book, I wrote it and I'm proud of it, but there's a lot of things I didn't write about that I should have. And I think edition 2 is going to be a lot more robust in a lot of ways. And I think it's going to be a worthy addition. So hopefully this becomes something I continue to add on to over the next, decade or so. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
Comment about the Supreme Court behavior.
I find it very curious that in a country where about 60% of people like Roe, the court struck it down. From a purely objective standpoint, almost no Americans want an Alabama style abortion ban in this country. What I actually think is if we put it on the ballot in every state, a 15-week abortion ban, so you can get abortion however you want up to 15 weeks, and then only for medical exemptions above 15 weeks would probably pass in every single state. And it will never happen because the pro-life movement feels like that's a failure. And the pro-choice movement feels like that's a failure because it's a compromise. But I think that's actually, if you look at the data, and I look at it a lot on abortion, most Americans are, their general position on abortion is, I don't love it, but if you want to have one, let's do it with some restrictions. And I think what we have right now is this weird extreme of like Alabama, where it's like, nope. And then you've got New York State, who's trying to put it in a constitutional right now at the same time. So we're getting this bipolar world, which most people on abortion are not bipolar. They're actually in the middle, and actually talk about that in 20 Myths. One chapter is most people are pro-choice or pro-life. Actually, most people are pro-choice-ish. That's where most people land. And I think our policies don't reflect that right now. The fact that 90% of Americans want universal background checks and we don't have that, and the fact that 20% of Americans want a full ban on abortion and we have that, is evidence that our system is slipping away from what it should be, which reflects the will of the voters. And I think no matter what side of the aisle you stand on, that's a very difficult spot, because what it does is delegitimizes the average person's view of the Supreme Court and all government institutions. And that's one of the key steps in how democracies die. So again, nothing but good news from me right now. You're all welcome for this.
Thank you.
I have a question. Thank you. This discussion has been
really interesting so far, but I wasn't able to find your old book, or hopefully I'll get your new one from the Chicago Public Library. And I searched for it several times under your name and under the name of the book. And I wonder why is that?
You
Maybe
got a
you
good
can
question
make sure
there.
on
I don't
that.
know.
But my okay, my real question is, do you have any statistics on the teenage population? I know that the COVID has just really, and the Zoom classes and everything has really impacted them so much. And do you have any information or statistics on that?
I
I have
do.
grandchildren and
I can't give you anything under 18 because it's really, really hard to survey people under the age of 18. Like it's a consent nightmare basically. But I'll give you 18 to 22-year-olds. This is the religious composition of 18 to 22-year-olds. So these are college age young people. The number one religious group of 18 to 20-year-olds is nothing in particular. It's I don't know or I don't care,
right.
which I think is really interesting. A third of them look at the question and go, meh, none of the above. And then Protestant is next at 20% and Catholic is next at 15%. So yeah, those two together, 36% are Protestant or Catholic and 32% are nothing in particular. 7% are atheist and 6% are agnostic, which I think is also really interesting because that number compared to the general public is actually only very slightly higher. I think in the general public, it's 6 and 5. So they're like 1 point more likely to be atheist and 1 point more likely to be agnostic or something like that. So it's very, very, wait, hold on. I can show you right here. Yeah, 6 and 5 right here. 6% are atheists in the general public and 5% are agnostic. Amongst the young people, it's 7% and 6%. So this idea that they're all like reading Nietzsche in college and becoming like stark raving atheists is just kind of not true at all. Actually, if you look at the data, young people, 18 to 22-year-olds who are not going to college are actually more likely to be nuns than the ones who are going to college. So college does not actually drives people away from religion. That's a total myth. Actually, it's one of the 20 myths, by the way, which was in the Wall Street Journal. College does not make people less religious. And interestingly enough, I looked at a survey where they asked people religious literacy questions about their faith and other faiths. And people who learned more about other faiths actually were stronger in their faith when they left college. So teaching other kids about other religions does not make them less religious. It actually makes them more religious. So I'm a big believer in education. Education is good, and especially religious education is good. But generally speaking, young people are nuns. We're talking about 45% of them have no religious affiliation, and going to 50% probably soon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nanette?
Yeah, my question is, you made a comment about preachers, pastors should not be political, but you talked about evangelicals having an outsized voice in political issues. And I'm wondering if you're talking about partisanship or if you're talking about social issues.
I think that evangelicals have captured the media's fascination more than anything else. And I think part of it is I grew up evangelical, just to put my cards on the table. I grew up Southern Baptist. I say I'm evangelical sympathetic, but I talk to a lot of reporters for my job, from places like the Washington Post, New York Times, the Atlantic, Wall Street Journal. A lot of these people grew up in communities where I'll give you an example today. I was talking to a producer from a big network, like one of the networks, and I go, well, he's not as big as Joel Osteen. And she goes, who's Joel Osteen? Joel Osteen's the most famous Protestant pastor on the planet right now. And she does not know who he is. So most media folks do not understand religion at a basic level. That's something I've learned the hard way. Okay. So they're fascinated about evangelicals because it almost seems like you're going to the zoo and looking at the animals, because they just seem so bizarre to them. Like they seem so just like otherworldly. And how can you believe that stuff? And so there's definitely a disconnect in the media discourse between like what happens in middle America where I live and where they live. And so they write about it almost like they're observing some like African tribe who's never had contact with civilization or something. I think in some ways it's dehumanizing to evangelicals. I actually do think that if we talked about Muslims the way we talk about evangelicals in the popular media, no one would be okay with that. But it's kind of okay because we see them as being far right wing, and they are far right wing, by the way, but they also do a lot of good stuff. That's where I'm evangelical sympathetic. You go on the border right now, the Southern Baptist Convention, they set up feeding stations for immigrants coming into America. If your tree falls down your house, they come cut down the tree. And I know no one wants to talk about that. Evangelicals do some good things in this world. It's worth talking about. So I think from the pulpit, they're not being that political, but where politics comes into church, I think this is really, really important point. It does not come from the pulpit. It comes from the pews. It's people talking to each other in the pews before and after church about the issues of the day, in the Sunday school class, in the midweek Bible study, at the potluck supper. That's where politics is being transmitted. It's not being transmitted from the pulpit down to the pews. It's the pews next to each other. And that's the only way I can look at it. So I think what's actually the most important moment for me in the church service is before and after. I think what happens in the church service is actually kind of irrelevant from a political science standpoint. It's what happens before and after, where all the political stuff is transmitted back and forth.
Although you do affirm the importance of ritual.
Oh,
That's what's happening.
yeah, but that's
in
not
the
from a
church
political
part.
science standpoint. That's just from like a cultural, social, sociological standpoint.
Right.
Yeah, psychological standpoint.
Mhm.
I think that to me is the most important thing that churches can do, is provide ritual for people. I just think, man, when I got laid off my job at EIU 6 or 7 years ago, I was dying to get back to church because I knew I need that ritual, that scaffolding to hold me up, to get me through another week. If I didn't have that, I'd be floating in social space and I would have been in a very bad way. I needed that. So I think church needs to provide ritual where people feel comforted. They feel like they know what's coming up, right? So it's anticipated. And they also feel like, man, when you say the creed out loud with each other and all your voices become one voice, the most powerful thing the moments I've ever had as a pastor is going to people on their deathbed and praying with them, but also saying, would you like to recite the creed? And they recite the creed word for word, even though they don't even know where they are. They can say the Lord's Prayer with me. They can sing Amazing Grace with me, even though they have dementia, right? Advanced Alzheimer's, but they can still remember those things because there's something about ritual that ingrains deeply in our souls that I can never understand or explain, but I know is transcendent. We need more of that. And we need young people to hear those stories, by the way, understanding that they don't have that and they need it desperately. And when I hear my 8 and 10-year-olds say the creed alongside me on Sunday morning, something happens inside me that I cannot even explain, because what it does is it ties me to them, but them to their grandparents and their great-grandparents and their great-grandparents. And there's something about that I will never, ever get over. And I think that's the beauty of religion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We have 2 more questions. Is it all right if we take those?
Yeah. I mean, I'll stay all night. I love this.
Awesome. All right. Charlotte and Alan, I think you guys are next.
Okay.
I had a question. In the book, in addition to nothing in particular, you sometimes mention the category something else.
Mm-hmm.
Has anything happened in that something else category, new something we should be on the lookout in the next updated edition?
Yeah, people are weird. That's what you should be aware of. So here's what something else is. Something else is literally the checkbox. So we give you 11 options, and the last option says something else. You check the box. We give you a little text box to type into, and people type weird stuff in the text box, like ancient alien theorist. That's one person typed in the text box. One person typed, I'm an atheist, but my wife's Lutheran, so I go to church with her. I was like, I don't know how to classify you. Well, one guy said he was a Rastafarian, which I can appreciate. One guy said it was a Jedi Knight, which I can also appreciate. I think what we're seeing is a lot more people are saying they're spiritual but not religious in that checkbox. We call them SBNRs, spiritual but not religious. What's interesting is you ask people, 47% of people say they're very spiritual, but only 20% of people say they're very religious. Religion has this negative connotation to it in American life now because it's involved with institutions. And Americans are anti-institution. That's what I've realized. We're not anti-God or anti-institution. So we can like de-link those two things. We'd be a lot better off. And the whole idea of Protestants are bad at this. They think things like Jesus is not a religion. It's a relationship. No, it's a religion. Okay. Christianity is a religion. Let's not get away from the fact that religion is, I just took a job at a place called Faith Counts, and my job is to show people the social scientific value of religion. I think religion is a good thing. I think institutions are a good thing. We need people to hear that message more, because if you don't have institutions, you got chaos. And what we've seen in the last couple of years is we got chaos because our institutions are crumbling. So I think with something else, you're going to see a lot more weirdness. That category is going to grow, and the diversity of answers is going to go up over time and be even harder to categorize, is what we're probably going to see.
What about, I have a question.
Yeah.
Bob Dedman's my name.
Hi, Bob.
What about all this pronoun nonsense?
What about this pronoun nonsense? Okay, so the general public is actually, the majority of Americans say there's only two genders, male and female. Even amongst Democrats, the majority of them still say there's only two genders, male and female. Okay. Now, I will say that if you look at data over the last year and a half, the acceptance of transgender has gone up over time amongst every category. I wonder if transgender, so with LGBT, we're actually really amazed by how fast views of gay marriage changed over time. 18% of Americans were in favor of same-sex marriage in 1988. Now it's close to 70% are in favor of same-sex marriage. How'd that happen? Well, the answer probably is a lot of people came out as gay. And it's really easy to dislike something you don't know anyone. But all of a sudden, if Uncle Bob at Thanksgiving goes, here's my husband, Steve, you're going to become a lot more accepting of gay marriage because you like Steve and Bob, right? I think transgender is just on the front edge of that because I think most people don't know someone who is transgender. So I think that we're going to see acceptance go up over time, but I don't know how much. Because there's also issues with like kids and hormone replacement therapy and all that stuff and athletics. There's a lot of things tied up with transgender that are very difficult to disentangle, even more difficult to disentangle than the gay marriage question. So I wonder if we're going to see, I think we're going to see more acceptance overall, but I wonder if we're going to hit a wall with that stuff when we hear stories about swimmers, female swimmers in biologically male swimmers in a female league dominating everyone. That doesn't do a whole lot to really engender tolerance toward LGBT people. So I'm really interested in that topic as well, but there's not been a whole lot of polling on it either because it's still so new.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
I have another question. This has been a very interesting hour. Is there a way to see this again? Has it been taped? I hope it has.
Oh, yes, I can answer that one. That's easy. Yes, it has been. It has been recorded, so you can rewatch this.
All right. And then we can come back to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I apologize for any errors or things I said. I didn't mean them.
I think one more question. Clarissa, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not able to turn on my camera. I think I need to update my Zoom, so that's on me. But I do have a couple of questions. The first one is, I don't know if you have followed the trends of deconstruction that became popular on TikTok and Reddit. Like personally, I saw many people from my undergrad go through it, which I thought was very interesting. And I'm not sure you have been able to observe trends and I don't know any projections since it seemed very popular in younger demographics.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we call them evangelicals more often than not, right? People who grew up evangelical, then left evangelicalism, called evangelicals. I think it's a classic example of there's a lot of people online who are evangelicals, but they're not actually, there's not that many people who are evangelicals, but they're really loud at being evangelicals. I think the share of people who are raised evangelical who are evangelical is about 3%. And we've done statistical analysis to try to figure this out, me and a couple of co-authors. So that 3%, though, overrepresents themselves online and they find a voice for other people. By the way, it's not just evangelicals. The ex-Mormon subreddit is actually really, really big and active. So it's not just people leaving evangelicalism, it's people leaving a lot of faith traditions and finding sort of a family, a second family online with other people who went through the same things they did. We always know that people deconstruct their faith when they move into, like, let's say their late teen years and early 20 years. It's just that the internet's given voice to that and given structure to that in ways we haven't had before. So I think it's always been going on. It's just now we can quantify it better and we can see it better because social media has allowed those voices to be amplified in ways they weren't amplified 20 or 30 or 40 years before. So.
Interesting. Now, I was wondering about that. And another question I have, I know you mentioned about engagement and giving people like bad things to come in, but something that I had a really good conversation about this a couple of weekends ago with a friend about how most of the engagement tends to happen with people who skew towards older ages, and that it's very hard to engage people in the younger ages. But something we noticed is that it is easier, usually in more conservative environments like evangelical churches, to engage younger people. So I don't know you have any observations about that.
Yeah. So the share of young people who identify as evangelical is now less than 10%. which is a coming crisis for them that they don't really do a great job of acknowledging. I think my favorite thing is when evangelicals like love to like make fun of Mainline because they're old, not realizing the average evangelical is about 3 years younger than the average Mainline Protestant. Like, so the median evangelical, the modal evangelical, which is the number that comes up the most in the data, is 58. The modal evangelical is 58 years old. Right. So they can laugh all they want about how the mainline's graying and dying off. 5 years later, they're going to be in the exact same boat the mainline is in. And they fail to recognize that and realize that it's actually a coming tsunami for them. But here's what's interesting. And I think this actually, I'm thinking about writing a book about like the 5 crises facing American evangelicalism. And one of them is the fact that these young evangelicals are actually more conservative than their parents are politically. So what you're doing is evangelicalism is always thriving the idea of like being close to the culture, but not being exactly like the culture, because you still need to reach out to the culture to bring people in. But if you're so far away from the culture, you have nothing in common with the culture. And how can you bring them in? So the further you get away from the world, to use a Christian term, the harder it is to evangelize the world. And it seems like on a couple issues that's really happening. For instance, LGBT, over 75% of people under the age of 30 are in favor of same-sex marriage. Okay. How do you bring people to an evangelical church that would say the gay people are less than when 80% of you people think it's totally fine? The other issue is female pastors. Over 75% of young people are fine with a woman preaching from the pulpit on Sunday morning, and evangelicals will not allow it. So how do you be open and inclusive when you're not open to LGBT and you're also not open to women being in leadership? So I think the problem is evangelicalism is facing these crises because they're trying to be so theologically distinct. They're getting further and further away from the average person, which makes it nearly impossible for you to draw the average person into your church. So that's where young people are. Very few number of evangelical, but the ones who are left are very conservative because you have to be. I mean, you don't be like, I'm evangelical, but gay people are cool. They don't do that. They go, I'm very evangelical, I'm very Trump, I'm very Republican, because that's kind of the identity they have then.
The way you close the book,
yeah,
is with Galatians 6:9.
Yeah.
I think that's worth repeating.
So I should leave that in the second edition is what you're trying to tell me?
Yep.
Okay, I will then. I'm not touching the conclusion. I read that again the other day and I was like, okay, that's pretty good. I should probably leave that in there, I suppose.
So let us not grow weary of doing what's right.
Amen. Amen. And you know what's funny about that, Bob? My atheist friends tell me the book sucks because it's just an evangelistic track to bring the nuns back to church. And my pastor friends don't like the book because I don't give them enough practical advice on how to bring people back to the church. So welcome to being a social scientist and a pastor in 2022. I'm too Christian for the atheist and not Christian enough for the evangelicals. So that's where I live.
Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing all of this with us. Lots of food for thought. I feel like I need to reread the book now and then get the second edition.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining.
Buy 20 Myths, please. I think if you enjoyed all the stats and this data and all that stuff, it's 20 discrete chapters on myths we believe about American religion and politics. For instance, evangelicals in decline is one chapter in the book. There's a chapter on, evangelicals did not like Donald Trump in the primary. That's a lie. They actually supported him in the primary across the board. Even the only category he lost were weekly attending evangelicals. He won, more than weekly evangelicals. He won weekly evangelicals, monthly evangelicals, never evangelicals. He beat them all. They loved Trump from the very beginning. Things like college leads people away from religion. There's all kinds of cool myths in there. They're all self-contained chapters, about 2,500 words. You can read each one individually. It takes 10 or 15 minutes to read one. You'll learn something about American life and religion and politics. So please buy that book as well.
You've done such a good job advertising it. We might have you back next year. Do this again.
I would love to talk to all the wonderful people at Fourth Presbyterian.
All right. Well, until then, have a good evening and I'll see you all later.
Thanks, everybody.
Blessings.
Blessings to you.
Thank you.
Go in peace to love and serve your neighbors.